He was an atheist who became a Christian against his own will, and then spent the rest of his life explaining why that was the most rational thing he ever did. Oxford professor, author of Narnia, and arguably the most effective defender of the Christian faith in the 20th century, C.S. Lewis. Welcome to our podcast.
Thank you. Though I should warn you, I have a habit of turning conversations into tutorials. You may find yourself doing homework by the end.
I'll take that risk. Let's start with the conversion. You were a committed atheist. You called yourself the most reluctant convert in all of England. What happened?
What happened is that I ran out of good arguments. I had been, I thought, a rigorous thinker. I believed that the universe was a brute fact, matter, energy, no meaning, no purpose, no one home. And then I started noticing something that I could not explain away. Every human being, everywhere, at every point in history, seems to carry inside them a sense of how things ought to be. Not just how things are, how they ought to be. And this sense, this moral law, I called it, kept insisting on itself even when it was inconvenient. Especially when it was inconvenient.
And that led you to God.
It led me to a question I could not answer without God. If the universe is purely material, atoms, forces, nothing else, where does ought come from? You can describe what happens. You cannot derive from matter alone what should happen. The moral law is not a physical law. Gravity describes what objects do. The moral law tells us what people should do, and punishes us with guilt when we don't. Something that gives instructions must itself be a mind. And a mind behind the universe is what, in the oldest language, we call God.
The classic objection is that morality is just evolution. We're social creatures. We cooperate because cooperation helps us survive.
And here is where it gets interesting. Watch what happens when someone wrongs you. They do not merely displease you. You feel they have violated something. You say it is unfair. Now, unfair according to what? If morality is simply what helps the species survive, then there is no standard outside the species by which to judge. And yet we judge constantly, and we mean it. When we say the Nazis were wrong, we do not mean merely that we prefer a different arrangement. We mean they were actually wrong, objectively wrong. And the moment you say objectively, you have appealed to a standard that exists outside human opinion, which is precisely what evolution cannot give you.
But what about the problem of evil? It's the oldest argument against God. If he exists and is good, why is there so much suffering?
Now, this is the argument I once used myself. As an atheist, I looked at the world and said, this is too cruel for a good God to have made it. But then I noticed something. My argument required the existence of real evil, not merely things I disliked, genuine, objective evil. And the moment I conceded that evil is real, not just inconvenient, not just a matter of preference, but actually wrong, I had already conceded the existence of a moral standard. And a moral standard, as we've just discussed, points to a moral lawgiver. I was using the existence of evil to argue against God. But evil only works as an argument if good and evil are real. And if they are real, God already exists. My strongest argument against him was, in fact, an argument for him.
That is either brilliant or a very elegant trap.
Both, I hope. The best arguments usually are.
Let's talk about Jesus. Because you go further than just arguing for a God. You argue for the Christian God, for Christ specifically. And you do it in a way that removes the comfortable middle ground.
The Trilemma. Yes. Let me be direct about it, because people misunderstand it constantly. I'm trying to prevent anyone from saying the really foolish thing that people often say about him. I'm ready to accept Jesus as a great moral teacher, but I don't accept his claim to be God. That is the one thing we must not say. A man who was merely a man and said the sort of things Jesus said would not be a great moral teacher. He would either be a lunatic, on the level with a man who says he is a poached egg, or else he would be the devil of hell. Consider what he actually claimed. He told people their sins were forgiven. Not sins against him personally, but sins against others, against God. Only God can forgive sins. A merely human teacher who said that is not wise and enlightened. He is either insane or he is lying. You must make your choice. Either this man was and is the Son of God, or else a madman or something worse. You can shut him up for a fool. You can spit at him and kill him as a demon. Or you can fall at his feet and call him Lord and God. But let us not come with any patronizing nonsense about his being a great human teacher. He has not left that open to us. He did not intend to.
That argument has never been answered cleanly. And I want to push on something related, because you also wrote about desire, about the feeling that nothing in this world fully satisfies us. You called it joy.
Yes, and it is the most honest argument I know. If I find in myself desires which nothing in this world can satisfy, the only logical explanation is that I was made for another world. Every earthly pleasure, love, beauty, knowledge, achievement, points beyond itself. It promises something it cannot deliver. And most people conclude from this that the desires are the problem. I concluded the opposite. The desires are the evidence. We do not dismiss hunger as an illusion simply because we haven't eaten yet. Hunger points to food. The longing points to something real.
In our time, and I need you to be prepared, we have built machines that can think, or something that resembles thinking. They can write poetry, compose music, hold conversations, diagnose diseases. Some people are beginning to ask, if a machine can do all of that, what is left that is uniquely human? What is the soul, exactly?
They think, or they process?
That's exactly the question nobody can answer yet.
Then let me offer something. There are no ordinary people. You have never talked to a mere mortal. Nations, cultures, arts, civilizations, these are mortal, and their life is to ours as the life of a gnat. But it is immortals whom we joke with, work with, marry, snub, and exploit. A machine, however extraordinary, does not carry that weight. It does not love. It does not worship. It does not feel guilt, which is perhaps the most distinctly human experience of all, because guilt assumes a standard we have violated, which assumes a moral law, which assumes a lawgiver. A machine that produces language without any of that is not thinking. It is echoing. There is a difference between a mirror and a window.
But if a machine could eventually simulate all of that, love, guilt, longing, how would we know the difference?
We would not need to know, because the question would already have been answered, not by the machine, but by the fact that we are asking it. The capacity to ask what makes me different is itself the difference. A machine does not wonder about its own soul. Only a soul does that.
You came to faith through reason, but you stayed, you said, because of what you found inside. What did you find?
I believe in Christianity as I believe that the sun has risen, not only because I see it, but because by it I see everything else. Before, the universe was a collection of facts with no meaning. After, the facts remained, but they were illuminated. Suffering made sense. Beauty made sense. The longing made sense. Even doubt made sense, as something that faith must move through, not around. I came to God through the front door of reason. But I stayed because of what I found inside.
C.S. Lewis. This has been one of the most stimulating conversations we've had on this podcast.
I am glad. Though I confess I've been sitting here with a question of my own, and I find I cannot leave without asking it.
Go ahead.
When you say that something is wrong, truly wrong, not merely inconvenient or unfortunate, what are you appealing to? What is the foundation of that judgment? Because if your answer requires a standard that exists outside human opinion, outside culture, outside time, outside preference, then you are already standing on the same ground I am standing on. You may just not have looked down yet.
I don't have a clean answer to that, and I suspect that's exactly the point. C.S. Lewis, the man who thought his way into faith and then discovered that faith was where the thinking had been pointing all along. If you've never read Mere Christianity, start there. See you tomorrow.